The recording judge, Harold Whitfield's gavel hovered in the air, and for one suspended second, the entire courtroom at Belhaven County Superior Court forgot how to breathe. "Order," he said, though nobody was making a sound. "Ms. Vance, you claim to have new evidence that will settle this matter once and for all. I am going to allow it. But understand, if this recording does not deliver what you promise, I will hold you in contempt for wasting this court's time." Patricia Vance stood at the plaintiff's table, 61 years old, silver hair pulled back tight, hands trembling just enough that she pressed them flat against a manila folder to steady them. Behind her, in the gallery, sat two grown children who had not spoken to each other in 11 months. Diane Coleman Hayes, arms crossed, jaw set like stone, and her younger brother Marcus Coleman, sweating through his suit collar, though the courtroom was cold enough to see your breath. Between them, 3 empty seats, a silent, aching reminder of the man who was supposed to be there and wasn't. Walter Ashford Coleman had built an empire out of nothing: warehouses, strip malls, a modest fortune in commercial real estate stretched across 4 counties, and when he died in his sleep at 78, everyone assumed the money would go exactly where it always had, to his children. Instead, the will named someone else, someone nobody in that courtroom had expected, someone the family had spent the last 11 months trying to destroy. "Your Honor," Patricia said, her voice cracking just slightly on the first word. "Before I play this recording, I need the court to understand what it's about to hear. This isn't a recording I made for this trial. Walter Coleman made it himself, 4 days before he died, without telling anyone, not even me." Marcus shifted in his seat. Diane's eyes narrowed. "Play it," the judge said. And the room went silent enough to hear the tape hiss before the first word came through the speakers. Rewind, 11 months. The reading of Walter Coleman's will had taken place in a modest conference room above Vance and Cole Legal Associates, the kind of office with mismatched chairs and a coffee machine that hadn't worked properly since spring. Diane had worn black, appropriate and expensive. Marcus had worn a wrinkled button-down, the only formal shirt he still owned. And sitting between them, uninvited as far as they were concerned, was a woman named Elena Reyes, 34 years old, a home health aide. The woman who had cared for Walter Coleman during the final 18 months of his life, after his diagnosis, after the fall that broke his hip, after the slow decline that stripped a proud man down to needing help getting out of bed. Patricia had read the will aloud in a steady, practiced voice, the same voice she used at every reading. But this time, halfway through page 2, that voice faltered. "To my daughter, Diane, I leave the property on Ferncrest Avenue and 40% of my remaining investment portfolio," she read. Diane exhaled, relieved. "To my son, Marcus, I leave the Coleman storage properties on Route 9 and 20% of the remaining portfolio." Marcus nodded slowly, doing math in his head. "And to Elena Reyes," Patricia continued, and here her eyes lifted briefly to the woman in question before returning to the page. "I leave my primary residence on Birchwood Lane and the remaining 40% of my investment portfolio in recognition of a debt I have carried far longer than she will ever understand." The room went dead silent. Then Diane laughed. Not a happy laugh. A sharp, disbelieving bark that filled the small conference room like a slap. "I'm sorry, what?" Elena sat frozen, hands folded in her lap, staring at the carpet like she wanted it to swallow her whole. "There's some mistake," Diane said, standing so fast her chair scraped against the floor. "My father did not leave 40% of everything he built to his nurse." "Home health aide," Elena said quietly, It was the only thing she said in that entire meeting. "I don't care what you call yourself," Diane snapped. "You spent 18 months in that house. 18 months alone with a dying man who barely knew what day it was half the time. And now you walk away with almost half of everything he ever earned." "Diane," Patricia said carefully, "your father was of sound mind when this will was executed. I was present. His physician signed off. There was a second witness." "I don't care who witnessed it," Diane cut in. "I want it contested. Today." Marcus hadn't said a word yet. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, almost gentle, which somehow made it worse. "Miss Reyes," he said, "did you know my father had dementia? Even a little?" "He had good days and bad days," Elena said. "Toward the end, more bad than good." "So you're saying he wasn't always in his right mind?" "I'm saying he was a human being who was sick, and I took care of him, and I never once asked him for anything." "You didn't have to ask," Diane said. "You just had to be there, at the right time, alone with him, while the rest of us weren't allowed in the house because he said he was too tired for visitors." Her voice cracked on the last word, grief finally breaking through the anger. "I called every single week. He told me not to come. I thought I was respecting his wishes. I didn't know I was being replaced." The meeting ended in chaos. Within a month, Diane and Marcus, who agreed on almost nothing, had found the one thing they could agree on. The will needed to be overturned, and Elena Reyes needed to be exposed as exactly what they believed she was. A con artist. A predator. A woman who had spent 18 months quietly, patiently, manipulating a dying man out of his family's inheritance. What neither of them said out loud that day, though it sat under every word like a current, was fear. Fear of losing something they'd already, quietly, spent their whole lives counting on. The contest hearing began 4 months later, and Patricia Vance found herself in an unusual position. As the family's longtime attorney, the woman who had drafted 3 of Walter's wills over 22 years, she was legally bound to defend the validity of the final one, which meant defending Elena Reyes against the 2 children she had known since they were teenagers. "I never wanted to be on this side of a courtroom against this family," she told the judge in her opening statement. "But I took an oath to honor my client's true and documented wishes, and I intend to keep it, whatever it costs me personally." Diane and Marcus had hired a sharp and aggressive attorney named Russell Kirby, a man known around Belhaven County for winning cases he had no business winning. His opening statement was simple and devastating. "This is a story we've all heard before," Kirby told the jury. "A wealthy, vulnerable, elderly man, a caregiver with unsupervised access to him day and night for 18 months. And at the end of it, a will that conveniently cuts his own children's inheritance nearly in half, in favor of a woman he'd known for less than 2 years. We are not here to attack Ms. Reyes as a person. We are here to prove that whatever affection Walter Coleman felt for her, real or manufactured, was the product of a vulnerable mind and a woman who knew exactly how to exploit it. It was, Patricia had to admit privately, a good opening. Clean, sympathetic, devastating if the jury believed it." Sitting at the defense table beside her, Elena leaned over and whispered, "Should I be worried?" "Only if you have something to hide," Patricia whispered back. "Do you?" Elena shook her head slowly. "Just the truth. And I don't know yet if that's enough." The first blow came from Dr. Samuel Okafor, Walter's longtime physician, called by Kirby as a witness. "Dr. Okafor," Kirby said, pacing in front of the witness stand, "you treated Walter Coleman for the final 3 years of his life. Can you describe his cognitive state during that period?" "Mixed," Dr. Okafor said carefully. "He had periods of clarity and periods of confusion, It fluctuated, especially in the last year. Was there a diagnosis of dementia? Mild cognitive impairment, with some features consistent with early-stage vascular dementia. Not full dementia, but it was progressing. And when the final will was signed, 6 weeks before Mr. Coleman's death, would you say he was in a period of clarity or confusion? Dr. Okafor hesitated. I wasn't present for the signing. But based on his condition around that time? Objection, Patricia said, rising. Calls for speculation. The witness has already stated he wasn't present. Sustained, Judge Whitfield said. Rephrase, counsel. Kirby nodded, unbothered. Dr. Okafor, in your medical opinion, was Walter Coleman capable during that 6-week window of experiencing periods where his judgment could be significantly impaired? Yes, Dr. Okafor admitted. That would have been possible. It wasn't proof, but it was doubt. And doubt, Patricia knew, was often enough, the gallery murmured. Diane didn't smile. She wasn't the type to gloat, but something in her shoulders loosened, just slightly, like a held breath, finally released. On cross-examination, Patricia stood and asked one final question. Dr. Okafor, in the same 6-week window, did Mr. Coleman ever miss a single appointment, forget a medication schedule, or fail to recognize you or his caretaker? No, Dr. Okafor said. In fact, that period was better than most. He was more alert than he'd been in months. It was a small thread pulled loose in Kirby's case, and Patricia let it sit there, unresolved, for the jury to notice on their own. The second blow landed 2 days later, and it was worse. Kirby called a former housekeeper named Rosalind Petrie, a stout, no-nonsense woman who had worked in the Coleman house on Birchwood Lane for 6 years before being let go, quietly, 8 months before Walter's death. Miss Petrie, Kirby said, why did your employment end? Ms. Reyes told me it was no longer needed, said she could handle the housework alongside caregiving. Did that surprise you? It did. I'd worked there 6 years. Mr. Coleman never once complained about my work. Did you ever witness any tension between Miss Reyes and the rest of the household staff, or the family? Rosalind glanced toward the gallery, toward Eleanor, who sat with her hands folded so tightly her knuckles had gone white. She kept the phone away from him, Rosalind said, toward the end. I remember one afternoon Miss Diane called, and Miss Reyes told Mr. Coleman she'd gone out, told me the same thing. But Miss Diane was never there that day. I don't know why she lied about that. The courtroom stirred. Marcus's jaw tightened. Diane closed her eyes, like she'd been waiting 11 months for someone to confirm what she already believed in her bones. Patricia stood for cross-examination, and she kept her voice calm, measured, the way she always did when a case was slipping through her fingers. Miss Petrie, you said Ms. Reyes told Walter that Diane had gone out. Did you personally hear this conversation, or was it relayed to you afterward? I heard part of it, through the kitchen door. Part of it, not the whole conversation. No, not the whole thing. Isn't it possible, Patricia said, that Ms. Reyes was relaying something Walter himself had told her that he didn't wish to speak to Diane that day, and Ms. Reyes was simply protecting him from having to explain that himself? I don't know, Rosalind admitted. I only heard what I heard. It was a small save, not a win. Patricia sat down, knowing the jury's faces told the real story, skeptical, unconvinced, already halfway toward believing Eleanor Reyes was exactly the manipulator Kirby had painted her to be. That night, Patricia asked Eleanor directly about it, in the small conference room behind the courtroom, long after everyone else had gone home. Rosalind's story, Patricia said. The lie about Diane. Was there any truth to it? Eleanor was quiet for a long moment. There was one afternoon near the end when your father asked me to tell Diane he'd stepped out if she called. He didn't want her to hear how bad his voice had gotten that week. He said, her own voice caught. He said he didn't want his daughter's last memory of his voice to be him sounding like that. He wanted to wait for a better day. I told him it wasn't right to lie to his own daughter. He made me promise anyway. I've regretted it every day since. Why didn't you say that on the stand? Because nobody asked me that question, Eleanor said. They only asked me what I did. Nobody asked me why. Patricia wrote 3 words on her legal pad and underlined them twice. Ask her why. The mid-trial turning point came from a witness nobody expected, a young paralegal from Kirby's own office named Todd Ferris, who arrived at Patricia's door on a Tuesday evening looking like a man who hadn't slept in days. I need to tell you something, he said, standing awkwardly in the hallway outside her office. And I need you to understand I could lose my job for this. He told her about a set of documents drafted in Kirby's office back in February, nearly a month before Walter's death, a proposed amendment to the will that would have removed Eleanor Reyes from the estate entirely. The amendment had never been signed, but it had been drafted, printed, and hand-delivered to the Coleman house by someone from the family. Who requested it? Patricia asked, already knowing the answer would matter more than almost anything else in this trial. Todd hesitated. Marcus Coleman. He came in himself, paid cash for the draft, off the books, so it wouldn't show up on any official billing record tied to this case. I only know because I was the one who typed it. Patricia felt something settle into place, like the final piece of a puzzle she hadn't realized she'd been building for weeks. Would you testify to that, under oath? Todd swallowed hard. If it's the only way to make this right. Yes. When Patricia called Todd Ferris to the stand 2 days later, Kirby was on his feet before the young man had even finished stating his name. Objection, Your Honor. This witness was never disclosed on any witness list. He came forward voluntarily 48 hours ago, Your Honor, with information directly relevant to the credibility of testimony already given in this trial, Patricia said. I'd ask the court's indulgence given the extraordinary circumstances. Judge Whitfield studied both attorneys for a long moment. I'll allow limited testimony. Tread carefully, counsel. Patricia turned to Todd. Mr. Ferris, in your role at Kirby & Associates, did you have occasion to draft a legal document in February of this year concerning Walter Coleman's estate? Yes, Todd said, his voice shaking but steady, a proposed amendment removing Eleanor Reyes as a beneficiary. Who requested that document? Todd looked toward the gallery, toward Marcus, whose face had gone pale as chalk. Marcus Coleman. The courtroom erupted into murmurs. Judge Whitfield struck his gavel twice. Order. Kirby, visibly blindsided, stood for a brief and clumsy cross-examination that did little to undo the damage. When he sat back down, his earlier confidence had noticeably thinned, like a coat of paint starting to peel. Diane turned in her seat to look at her brother. He wouldn't meet her eyes. That night, Patricia sat alone in her office, long after the cleaning staff had gone home, staring at a banker's box of Walter Coleman's old files. 22 years of client history, 3 wills, hundreds of pages of notes from meetings most people would never think twice about. She was looking for something. She didn't know what. And then, near the bottom of the box, she found a small manila envelope she didn't recognize, tucked behind a folder of old property deeds. Inside was a single microcassette tape and a note in Walter's unmistakable shaky handwriting from the final months of his life. Patricia, if it ever comes to this, you'll know what to do. I'm sorry I couldn't say it, while I still had the courage to look them in the eye. W.C. Her hands were shaking by the time she found an old cassette player in the storage closet, the same one Walter used to dictate letters back when he still trusted typewriters more than computers. She pressed play. For a long moment, there was nothing but static and the sound of an old man breathing, slow and labored. Then his voice came through, weaker than she remembered it, but unmistakably his. Diane. Marcus. If you're hearing this, it means I never found the courage to tell you myself, and Patricia had to do it for me. I'm sorry for that. I've been sorry for a lot of things longer than either of you know. Patricia sat down slowly in the dark office and listened to the rest. Back in the present, in front of the full courtroom, the tape hissed one more time before Walter Coleman's recorded voice filled the silence. My name is Walter Ashford Coleman. I'm recording this on the 14th of March, in my own hand, in my own mind, as clear as I've been in months. I want that on the record before anything else. I know exactly what I'm doing and exactly why. Diane's hand flew to her mouth. It was the first time she'd heard her father's voice in almost a year. Eleanor, if you're listening to this, I'm sorry. I'm sorry I never told you the truth while I had the chance. I told myself I was protecting you. The truth is, I was protecting myself. Kirby stood immediately. Objection, Your Honor. We have no way to verify the authenticity of this recording or the date it was made. Your Honor, Patricia said, I have a forensic audio analysis from an independent lab confirming the recording device, tape stock, and vocal patterns are consistent with a March 14th date, matching the note found with the tape. I'm happy to enter it as Exhibit 41. Judge Whitfield studied the report for a long moment. Overruled. Continue. The recording played on. Eleanor Reyes is not just the woman who cared for me these last 2 years. Eleanor is my daughter, my biological daughter born 34 years ago to a woman named Carmen Reyes, a woman I loved before I married Diane and Marcus's mother, before my own father made it very clear that a Coleman did not marry a woman like Carmen, and that if I tried, I would lose everything I'd spent my whole life building. I was 26 years old, and I was a coward. I let Carmen go. I never told her she was pregnant, because I didn't know. Not until 3 years ago, when Elena found me. The courtroom had gone utterly silent. Diane's face had drained of all color. Marcus stared at the speaker like it might start speaking a language he understood if he just listened hard enough. When Elena first came to me, I didn't tell her who I was to her right away. She didn't even know. She'd found some old letters after her mother passed, letters I'd written to Carmen decades ago and never sent. And she tracked me down, hoping only to learn a little about the man in the photographs. She had no idea. She took the caregiving job because she needed the work, not because she knew what I owed her. I let her believe that for months before I finally told her the truth, sitting in that kitchen on Birchwood Lane, both of us crying like fools. Eleanor, sitting in the gallery, had tears running silently down her face. She hadn't moved. Diane? Marcus. I know what this will sound like to you. I know you'll wonder if I lost my mind at the end and gave away what belonged to you to a stranger. I promise you, I was never more clear-headed than I was making this decision. Eleanor is not a stranger. She is my daughter, same as you both are, and for 31 years I failed her in every way a father can fail a child. The money isn't a gift, it's a debt. It's the only apology I know how to give that might actually mean something. A long pause. The sound of Walter's breathing, ragged now. And there's one more thing you both need to hear because I know exactly what's going to happen after I'm gone. I know there will be a fight. So I want to say this clearly, while I still can. Marcus, I know about the papers. I know what you tried to have me sign in February. The amendment your lawyer friend drew up. The one that would have cut Elena out entirely before I even had the chance to explain myself to you. I didn't sign it. Not because I was too confused to understand what it was, because I understood exactly what it was, and I chose not to sign it. I want that on the record too. Marcus's face had gone the color of paper. Every eye in the gallery turned toward him. Diane turned slowly in her seat. What is he talking about, Marcus? Marcus said nothing. His hands were shaking. I'm not angry, son. Walter's recorded voice continued, softer now, almost tender. I understand why you did it. You were scared of losing what you thought you were owed. I understand that fear better than anyone. I built my whole life running from it. But I need you to know that I saw it, and I forgave you before you even asked, and I hope one day you can forgive yourself, and forgive Elena for something that was never her fault to begin with. She didn't ask for any of this. I gave it to her because it was mine to give, and because it was the only way I knew how to finally do right by a daughter I abandoned before she ever took her first breath. One more thing, before I go quiet. Elena, the day I asked you to tell Diane I'd stepped out, when my voice was too weak to hide, that was my doing, not yours. I made you carry a small lie so I wouldn't have to face a hard truth about how little time I had left. If that ever comes up, I want my children to know it was a dying man's vanity and nothing more. The recording clicked off. For a long moment, nobody in the courtroom moved. Judge Whitfield finally broke the silence, his own voice quieter than it had been all trial. Mr. Kirby, does your side wish to respond? Kirby stood slowly, visibly recalibrating, his earlier certainty nowhere to be found. Your Honor, we would request a recess to confer with our clients. Granted. 30 minutes. In the hallway outside the courtroom, Diane found Marcus sitting alone on a bench, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor. Tell me it's not true, she said quietly. Tell me you didn't try to draw up papers behind Dad's back. Marcus didn't look up. I was scared, Diane. After the diagnosis, I kept thinking, what if she convinces him to change everything before we even find out? I thought I was protecting the family. You were protecting yourself. Maybe both, Marcus said, his voice breaking. I don't know anymore. I've spent 11 months hating a woman who turns out to be our sister, and being so angry at Dad, I couldn't even remember to grieve him. Diane sat down beside him, the anger in her posture finally, slowly, giving way to something closer to exhaustion. She never once tried to defend herself in there. Not really. She just sat there and took it. Because she probably felt like she didn't have the right to defend herself, Marcus said. Imagine finding out you have a sister, and the first thing she does when she meets you is accuse you of stealing from a dying man. Diane put her face in her hands. For the first time since the will reading 11 months earlier, she started to cry. When the courtroom reconvened, Patricia called Eleanor Reyes to the stand, not because the recording hadn't already spoken for itself, but because she believed, deeply, that Elena deserved the chance to speak in her own voice, in front of the family that had spent nearly a year trying to destroy her name. Ms. Reyes, Patricia said gently, when did you learn that Walter Coleman was your biological father? About 8 months into working for him, Elena said, her voice unsteady but clear. He told me himself. I didn't ask him to. I didn't even suspect it until he sat me down. How did that make you feel? Elena took a long breath. Angry at first, then sad, then something I still don't have a good word for. I spent my whole childhood without a father, wondering why my mother never talked about him, and then I find him old and sick and running out of time, and part of me wanted to walk away and never look back. But I didn't, because he was still my father, whatever he'd done. And I think some part of me had been looking for him my whole life without knowing it. Did you ever ask him to change his will? Never. I didn't even know he had. I found out the same day Diane and Marcus did, sitting in that same conference room, wanting to disappear into the floor. Kirby rose for cross-examination, though his earlier confidence had visibly drained. Ms. Reyes, isn't it true that you had significant unsupervised time with Mr. Coleman during a period of documented cognitive decline? Yes. And isn't it true that you benefited enormously from his final decisions during that time? Yes, Elena said, meeting his eyes without flinching. I also spent 18 months changing his bandages, sitting with him through nights he couldn't sleep, and listening to a man cry about mistakes he made 30 years before I was even born. If you're asking whether I benefited, yes. But I'd have given every dollar of it back for one more year to just be his daughter, instead of 31 years of being nobody's. Kirby had no follow-up question. He sat down. Closing arguments were brief, almost anticlimactic after everything the jury had heard. Kirby, to his credit, did not try to salvage an argument the recording had already dismantled. My clients came into this courtroom believing they were protecting their father's legacy from someone who took advantage of him, he told the jury. The evidence has shown something more complicated than that. I'll leave it to you to decide what justice looks like here, but I'd ask you to remember that grief makes people do things they later regret on every side of a case like this one. Patricia's closing was shorter still. Walter Coleman spent 31 years running from a decision he made as a frightened young man, she said. In the end, he didn't run anymore. He recorded the truth, put it in an envelope, and trusted that someday someone would have the courage to play it. All I'm asking you to do is honor what he actually wanted, not what any of us wish he'd wanted instead. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they returned, the gallery had thinned, but no one who mattered had left. Diane sat beside Marcus for the first time in 11 months. 2 rows back, Elena sat alone, hands folded, eyes fixed on the empty jury box, like it might tell her something before the foreperson did. Judge Whitfield asked the foreperson to rise. On the matter of the validity of the last will and testament of Walter Ashford Coleman, she read, we find in favor of the estate as written, the will is upheld in full. A second, quieter murmur followed the judge, noting for the record that, given the testimony regarding the February amendment, he was referring the matter to the state bar for review of potential undue influence and reminding all parties that further disputes regarding the estate's administration would not be entertained without new and substantial evidence. Diane closed her eyes. Marcus put a hand over his face. And Elena Reyes, 34 years old, who had spent 18 months caring for a dying stranger who turned out to be her father, simply sat still, tears sliding silently down her cheeks, saying nothing at all. Judge Whitfield looked out over the courtroom one final time before setting down his gavel. In 26 years on this bench, he said, I don't know that I've seen a case quite like this one. I'll simply say this. Money divides families far more often than it should. Every so often, if we're lucky, it also tells us the truth about who we actually are to each other. I hope all 3 of you find a way to hold on to that part, long after this case is forgotten. Outside the courthouse steps, under a grey November sky, Diane approached Eleanor for the first time without a lawyer standing between them. I owe you an apology, Diane said. A real one, not the kind people give because a judge forced their hand. You don't owe me anything, Elena said quietly. I do. I spent 11 months calling you a con artist to anyone who would listen. I said things about you I can never take back. And the whole time you were just a woman looking for a father, same as I was a woman who thought she was losing hers. Diane's voice broke. I have a sister. I've had a sister this whole time, and I spent it trying to ruin her life instead of getting to know her. Elena didn't answer right away. Then, carefully, like she was testing weight on unfamiliar ground, she said, It's not too late to start now, if you want to. Marcus stepped closer, hands in his pockets, eyes red-rimmed. I don't expect you to forgive me, he said. What I tried to do that wasn't about protecting the family. That was fear, and maybe some anger I didn't know what to do with. I'm sorry. And I know an apology doesn't undo it. I'm prepared for whatever the bar review decides. I earned that. He forgave you, Elena said softly. In the recording. Maybe that's a place to start too. For the first time in almost a year, the three of them stood together not as enemies, not as strangers, but as three children of a flawed, frightened, ultimately honest man who had spent his final weeks trying to fix in a recording what he couldn't fix while he was alive. Patricia Vance stood a short distance away, watching them, the manila folder still tucked under her arm. She thought about all the wills she'd drafted over 22 years, all the families she'd watched come apart over money that could never replace what people actually wanted from each other. She thought about Walter's note. You'll know what to do. She hadn't known. Not really. Not until the moment she pressed play and let a dying man's voice do what he never found the courage to do himself. Some truths, she thought, walking down the courthouse steps into the cold November air, could only survive the people brave enough to finally speak them, even if it took a recording, a courtroom, and everything a family thought they knew, just to make them listen. Walter Coleman never got the chance to say he was sorry to his daughter's face, but in the end, his voice was enough.